Hi guys, it's Debbie, and now we finally have the Oscar nominees. So we know who will be competing next month for the Academy Awards and who will potentially be called on stage for that highly desired statue. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you will know that over the course of time, I became a bit disillusioned with the Oscars. On the one hand, this was because it basically became the only film award that received any attention. Who cares if Parasite won at the Cannes Film Festival? Will it get that statue in LA? I'm not saying I'm any better. I'm here speaking about the Oscars. I didn't speak about the Sundance Film Festival. I think we're all guilty of this because we all tend to give more attention to a film that could potentially be an Oscar winner because chances are it probably is a good movie. So I think my feelings were more contrasting than pure angry ones. Because at the same time, the Oscar race brings attention to films that otherwise would be totally overlooked. Let's take again the example of Parasite. It wouldn't have received half of the attention if so many people hadn't been speaking about it, and if they hadn't been speaking about it in relation to the Oscars. Or for example, my movie antennae spiked up after seeing so much attention given to 1917 at the Golden Globes and all these talks about it being at the Oscars. So I was already torn between contrasting feelings, but the main reason for which I had become very disillusioned with the Oscars was because it became more of a publicity stunt rather than an award giving recognition to excellent filmmaking. First we had skits such as Helen Mirren promoting an expensive jet ski on stage, which was beyond cringeworthy. Then, because the attention span was declining, there was the idea of not even showing the audiences certain categories, which were considered too technical and not engaging. So many people who ultimately make a film what it looks like were not considered fancy enough for the cameras. And then the Academy had another brilliant idea, which was that of including a most popular film category, something which was not met well with audiences. Of course, it fits perfectly in nowadays society in which likes and views and popularity, there is everything. They could have just done an Instagram poll at that point. Luckily, that decision was taken back very quickly. Anyway, all of this is to say that my enthusiasm towards the Oscar ceremony was less and less as time went by. But as soon as I saw this year's nominees, my excitement came back. This year there's a lot of competition. This is a tough one, and I like it. Most categories actually have at least 2 or 3 titles which are going to be a close win. There are very few titles about which we all thought, why on earth did they decide to include that? So today we're going to cover all the categories and see who I think could win, who I would like to win, and so on. Usually my predictions are completely wrong, so it'll be fun to come back to this video in a month's time when the final awards are actually handed out. And also remember to leave your opinion on all these films, all these topics, with a comment down below. Just a quick reminder before starting, as there are so many categories, so many nominated titles, I will have to move through them quite quickly. So please forgive me if I don't go in depth on every single name in every single category, but I will do my best. So let's start with what everybody's interested in, Best Picture, so Best Film. In this category, the nominees are Ford vs Ferrari, The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women, Marriage Story, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Parasite. Now, before we go any further, I haven't seen 1917 yet. I know, but it's not available in any cinema close to me. It's not available in Italy yet. I don't even know when it will be available here. So I would just have to go through all this based on assumptions about this film, about what it has already won. But please support me in the comments until I have seen this film. I want to know your feedback if you have seen the movie already. So out of all these nominees, Marriage Story is probably the one I think has the least chances of winning. I loved it, but compared to many other plots on this list, it is the simplest. It is the story of a couple going through a very bad divorce, and the plot is very character driven. So when I say simplest, I don't mean that every film needs to be Inception, but this is a story that, if deserving awards, would deserve them more for the acting categories rather than as a general film. Setting aside 1917, which has already won 2 Golden Globes, one for Best Film and one for Best Director, I think there is a big competition here between Joker, Parasite and The Irishman. The Irishman, I'm sorry to put it down like this, but it is an award voters love. It has a huge epic story, huge acting, it has the soundtrack, the effects, it's a Scorsese film. It's the real life story of a mafia group operating in and around Philadelphia and focusing on one mobster's life in particular, portrayed by Robert De Niro. And the story covers his life and the life of his associates over a decades-long time span. Then there is Joker, and Joker is Joker. It's fantastic. It's already won a ton of prizes, and it's the dramatic story of a person who is abandoned by society to the point that he just flips. It's set in the world of Batman, but without ever directly, specifically reference it. You can watch this film even without even knowing the existence of Batman. Joaquin Phoenix was absolutely incredible in the main role, the soundtrack was gut-wrenching, the cinematography was beautiful, and the whole story makes you think. The story doesn't offer an interpretation of its own, it doesn't present the plot as right or wrong. It lets you use your brain and figure out what you think about the story. So your viewing experience will be completely different from everybody else's, and the story covers topics which you can take out of that world of Gotham and place in your own. The third big competitor here is Parasite. Now, if Parasite won, it would break the internet. And I kind of want it to win just to prove that you don't always need a Scorsese or Tarantino for how beautiful their films are, but you don't always need that to get to the big awards. Parasite is a combination of genres. It's a horror film, but not totally gory horror. It also has a lot of dark humor, it is dramatic, and it covers the story of a very poor family who infiltrates a very wealthy family using all possible means. This is the film that keeps you on the edge of your seat. The story unfolds in a way we would have never expected, and it just keeps on spiraling down. There are twists and turns with incredible cinematography and editing. Now, there's actually another title on this list of nominees that I was actually really pleased to see included, and that is Jojo Rabbit. Now, Jojo Rabbit opens as a fun, dark humor story of a kid living in Nazi Germany, a kid who belongs to the Nazi youth organizations. He sees Hitler as his idol. He actually has a childish version of Hitler as his imaginary friend. But this opening then evolves into a really engaging story that shows many messed up aspects of a Nazi-ridden environment, of the choices that were made, of the mentality at the time, but still maintaining that irony. So Jojo Rabbit is an interesting choice, but the Academy being the Academy, the biggest competitors are probably going to be 1917 and The Irishman. Although seeing Bong Joon-ho going on stage for Parasite would be an epic moment. Then the nominees for Best Director are actually very similar, if not the same, to the Best Film category. Martin Scorsese for The Irishman, Todd Phillips for Joker, Sam Mendes for 1917, Quentin Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Bong Joon-ho for Parasite. So many of my same thoughts from before apply here. There is a lot of potential with Bong Joon-ho for Parasite, but also Todd Phillips for Joker. Because Joker really is a combination of many wonderful elements, all brought together by one eye, overseeing it all. There isn't one category in particular that stood out in Joker, if not the acting. It was a combination of elements. Many have actually been really hating on Joker, the fact that it's receiving so much appraisal. I mean, I can understand not liking it, but actually hating it, that's what I can't understand, and being upset about it being at the Oscars. And I think, as I was saying, it's mostly because people see it as a superhero or anti-hero story, when in reality it's just a completely different genre. And I've seen people criticizing it, for example, for having Arthur Fleck, so the main character Joker, saying some very simple lines, some lines with like mistakes in them, grammar mistakes. But that is actually an important detail. Arthur Fleck basically still lives as a child. He has lived a life of neglect on behalf of society. He isn't an intellectual. He would never step out and be like, "Thus begins." Anyway, Sam Mendes has already won a Golden Globe for Best Director for 1917, so he's a big competitor here. But then again, Martin Scorsese with The Irishman basically completed the Oscar voters checklist. So most of my thoughts on the Best Director category are the same for the Best Film category. It would be interesting to see Todd Phillips for Joker or Bong Joon-ho for Parasite step on stage. We'll just have to see. But as we were speaking of Joker and of Joaquin Phoenix, Phoenix is probably the most likely winner in the Best Acting category. The other nominees are Antonio Banderas for Pain and Glory, Leonardo DiCaprio for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Adam Driver for Marriage Story, and Jonathan Pryce, The Two Popes. Joaquin Phoenix has already won a Golden Globe for his role as Arthur Fleck in Joker, as well as a ton of other awards and nominations. And I hate to bring up comparisons with Heath Ledger's Joker. They're two completely different concepts, but the effect that Phoenix had on the audience with his Joker was very similar. It was something we didn't even know we wanted, and to make somebody so anonymous as Arthur, who is forgotten by society, suddenly so important to us, that was amazing. Summing this whole category up, I think he'll be the winner. Another big contender is Adam Driver for Marriage Story because of his emotion-fueled role. Marriage Story might be lacking a roller coaster storyline, as after all it's not much more than a couple falling apart, but it's totally based on the destructive emotions of a lost love. Driver is completely torn apart. He is bawling his eyes out. He is punching things. He is spitting and swearing. He is red in the face. He is crawling around on the floor. He embodies that furious rage we can only have towards somebody we love to pieces. But then, is it really hate, or is it just that painful hole of where we used to hold somebody that was so important to us? Driver takes us down all those agonizing paths, and 20 minutes earlier we didn't even know his character existed. I think the least probable winners on this list could be Jonathan Pryce for The Two Popes and Leonardo DiCaprio for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'll get this right by the end of the video, but he has actually already won in the past for some very unexpected films, such as his role in The Revenant. I think the biggest card here is Phoenix. And now, having covered this male category, I would like to say, where is The Lighthouse? I was 100% expecting The Lighthouse to be in the male acting category, but it's nowhere to be seen across all categories. I think it might pop up somewhere further on the line, like in cinematography, but nothing for Robert Pattinson, nothing for Willem Dafoe, and I found that so surprising. Both Pattinson and Dafoe, who in The Lighthouse are two men stuck on an island in a storm, gave way more compelling interpretations than those of many other people on today's lists. I am very, very confused. I didn't expect them to win, but to not even receive a nomination, that's odd. I also really expected Uncut Gems to appear somewhere across these lists. It has been receiving showers of appraisal from basically the first day it was released. I think it actually eventually ended up with no nominations. I was expecting at least Adam Sandler to pop up at some point, not to win, but at least a nomination. So no The Lighthouse and no Uncut Gems. I mean, for supporting actors, you have Brad Pitt, who in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood did nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is beyond whether you enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a general film. But that role, I understand Leonardo DiCaprio's, but why Brad Pitt's role? I get the other nominees, Tom Hanks for Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Anthony Hopkins for The Two Popes, and then there's both Al Pacino and Joe Pesci for The Irishman. Again, I don't expect every film to be on an Inception style level with really deep character analysis, but why Brad Pitt for his role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Anyway, deep breath. I believe the biggest contender here, and the one I would be pleased to hear called on stage, would be Al Pacino for The Irishman. I knew nothing about his character before watching the film, and I believe that most people outside the United States probably didn't know much about his character or knew just the general information about him. In The Irishman, Al Pacino is Jimmy Hoffa, a union leader who is helped by various mobsters. But regardless of the fact that we knew hardly anything about his character, and regardless of the fact that he was even one of the plainest roles, he wasn't one of the high-profile mafia guys, we felt really curious about his story. And now let's move over to the ladies. We have Cynthia Erivo for Harriet, Scarlett Johansson for Marriage Story, Saoirse Ronan for Little Women, Charlize Theron for Bombshell, and Renee Zellweger for Judy. Now, fun fact, I didn't really like Bombshell. I found it, please allow me to say this, very American. It is the real story of a group of women and of the sexual harassment they suffered on the workplace at a news station. And that is a very important story. That's not the part I didn't like about the story. It was very interesting, very sad. What I didn't like was how the first part of the film kind of gave for granted that we all knew who these people were, what Fox News was, its political affiliation, that environment. I don't think that many people outside the US knew that much about that situation, about Fox News, about the fact that it was a conservative, it is a conservative news station. And if we did discover it, it was mostly through like Donald Trump and his tweets and about all the fake news. I don't know, maybe what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. But what I did enjoy about the film were the roles, the acting roles. I liked Margot Robbie's character. She was this beautiful, innocent, kind of dreamy girl with all this big aspiration of making it in the industry, with a pretty face, but who soon discovers the dark side of it all. So regardless of all the background story to the film, I'm so pleased that Charlize Theron is amongst the nominees. She was also awesome in the film. She portrays one of the most important women at Fox News back at the time, so the one in the biggest spotlight and obviously the one in the most sticky position when this sort of behaviour comes to light. Unfortunately, I'm a little limited in speaking about this Best Actress category, as it includes not one but two films I haven't seen yet, Judy and Harriet, which put together actually sound like a new film title. But unfortunately, due to that, I can't elaborate that much more about this list. I can speak about the Supporting Actress category. We have Kathy Bates for Richard Jewell, Laura Dern for Marriage Story, Scarlett Johansson for Jojo Rabbit, Florence Pugh for Little Women, and Margot Robbie for Bombshell. So I already spoke about how much I loved Margot Robbie in Bombshell. I'm really pleased she wasn't included here for her role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but there are some very other interesting names here. Scarlett Johansson in Jojo Rabbit. I loved the film. I loved Scarlett Johansson's character, but I think that most of the charm surrounding her character is only in relation to other characters or to the context in which she is. For example, there are some very fun interactions she has with Sam Rockwell's character. He is a sort of failing, drunk, kind of depressed, but rather innocuous Nazi. So it's his character that makes the interaction memorable, if you see what I mean. I think you would have to see the film in order to understand what I mean here, because I am afraid of stepping into spoiler land if I go any further. Then 2019, yes, has been a great year for Florence Pugh. She went from basically nobody talking about her to starring in Midsummer, the horror film, and now she is nominated for her role in Little Women. Another huge competitor is Laura Dern in Marriage Story. Marriage Story is the divorce film, let's call it like that, I was speaking about earlier. So Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson are going through a divorce, and Laura Dern is one of the lawyers that are involved. But she is one of those bitchy, LA, overpaid, super high heels, killer woman kind of lawyer. She is extremely annoying, but I think that if that feature passes on to the audience, it means something. So I'm not sure who the winner could be here. It could actually turn out to be Margot Robbie. She has been on that award scene for quite a while now. It could be her time. I'm actually kind of surprised that nobody from Knives Out was nominated here. I think there were a few nominations, maybe at least one at the Golden Globes, because there were quite a few roles there. For example, Toni Collette's one. But I think Knives Out was nominated, yes, as the overall story in the Best Original Screenplay category, which basically means not a story that is based on something already existing, but a totally new story. The other competitors are, for example, Marriage Story, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Parasite. Now again, I would exclude something like Marriage Story here. I would have preferred a story like The Lighthouse to be included here instead. If you think about it, Marriage Story doesn't actually offer anything particularly innovative. It is mostly character driven. It is, after all, just a story of a couple breaking up and everything that entails. I really think the best story in this category is Knives Out. Knives Out offers that old school setting of mysterious death in a mansion, and the detective has to figure out which one of the mysterious group of characters has done it, and they all seem to have a reason to do it. But the story is so well written, with such great character detail, interesting developments and twists and turns, it keeps you intrigued right to the very last moment. For Best Adapted Screenplay instead, so a story based on already existing material, we have The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, Little Women and The Two Popes. Let's start off with The Two Popes, which didn't particularly strike me with impressive storytelling. Let's say an engaging story. It is mostly based on just the dialogues between the two main characters and, let's say, insights into the lives of those who live at the Vatican. So for how good the film may be, I don't think it would deserve to win an award for the screenplay, especially with these other titles in competition. For example, I have a feeling The Irishman is going to win here. After all, it is the story of a lifetime, and it keeps you engaged for the full 3 hours and a half. Could it have been shorter? Definitely. Was the story interesting all the way to the end? Absolutely. We relived the character's whole lifetime. I'm speaking about decades of time. We got to know co-workers, families, friends, enemies, quirks, peculiarities. We formed our opinion on these people, and I can definitely see the Academy handing out an award here. Jojo Rabbit is also an interesting choice. It gave us something which could have turned out as controversial or just funny, but in the end it was a perfect combination of dark irony, fun moments, delightful characters, and by the end I had full-blown tears running down my face, but I was still laughing. It was great. Little Women is another big contender here. It feels a little like one of those films that receives loads of nominations but ends up not actually earning that many awards at the end of the day. But one of the potential awards could be this adapted screenplay. So yes, probably The Irishman versus Little Women. Let's move on to cinematography, where, surprise, surprise, we have The Lighthouse. Then some of the other recurring names, so The Irishman, Joker, 1917, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, although I haven't seen 1917, I have heard great things about many of its details, especially cinematography and editing, because apparently, basically, the film is made to look like one continuous shot from beginning to end. That is setting the bar very high for the other contenders. Personally love the cinematography in Joker, but The Irishman also has a lot of great shots. And I guess this is my one and only chance to speak about The Lighthouse, because it's nowhere else to be seen. This film has a lot of great shots. There are some shots in this film which I believe could have been taken out of the movie and just placed on a wall as a piece of art. Now, The Lighthouse is a very anxiety-fueled story of two guardians of a lighthouse who end up stuck on a very cramped island during a storm. And as we all know, being stuck with another person is not a great thing, especially when it turns out to be a grumpy dude with a sullen attitude and the weather starts to make you go insane. This film is odd. Many scenes are completely weird, but they are beautifully laid out. I just don't know if that is enough to beat The Irishman or Joker or 1917. I'm going to have to move on faster through these last categories, or this video is going to be terribly long. I'm actually going to wave a total white flag on two categories, which are sound mixing and sound editing, because every year I try to give an educated opinion on these categories and I realize I don't actually have enough knowledge to give a good opinion on these films. I mean, there would be no sense me saying, oh yeah, the sound mix in Ford versus Ferrari was so good, when I don't really even know what I'm talking about. I'm also going to have to skip over short films, documentaries, international and animated films, because I saw very few nominees in these categories, so not enough to give a comprehensive opinion. But I can speak about other categories. There is production design. Now, in my younger years, I always say, as if I'm old now, but I always used to struggle with grasping what actually production design meant. It's not acting, it's not the story itself, but basically it's a bunch of visual elements that all come together to deliver that final effect a film has on viewers. Think of movies like Grand Budapest Hotel, Moulin Rouge, Mad Max Fury Road, or the original first Star Wars film. Anyway, this year the nominees are The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Parasite. Now, for how much I didn't like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I could see it winning here. I haven't seen 1917, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood really drags you back to an era. It never really feels like a squeaky clean, modern 21st century piece which is trying to show you those good old times. I think it could potentially be the winner. I don't think it was so much because of the costumes, it was also nominated in that category, but it was all the general Hollywood old times. It was a La La Land, but 40 years earlier. Speaking of costumes, the nominees for costume design, aside from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which again didn't really stick in my mind for that reason, except for maybe Sharon Tate with her fancier outfits, but the other nominees are The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, and Little Women. I'm not really sure who to pick here, who to predict as a winner. None of these films had these particularly impressive outfits that stuck in my memory. I'm kind of surprised Rocketman wasn't nominated here, because the costumes play a very important role in that film. I mean, Elton John's outfits are such an important part of his personality. Even the costumes in Joker weren't that particularly impressive, mostly because Arthur is actually a very anonymous character. I'm lost for words here about this category. I mean, I can speak well about Jojo Rabbit because there is a very important sequence in the film which requires viewers to remember a very specific outfit detail. And I'm not going to say anything more to not spoil anything, but if that sticks in memory, it means there was a big work on that. I know that doesn't speak about the whole wardrobe department. It's not a Lord of the Rings, Alice in Wonderland, Pirates of the Caribbean kind of effect, but it's the only thing I can really say about these characters. I mean, even the character of Hitler himself is very peculiar because he is portrayed as a childish version of what Hitler would look like. He often turns up with some very odd things on. I don't know, I'm kind of lost here, but if you have any suggestions, please let me know with the comments down below. Then what's still missing? Visual effects. Now, Cats, this wonderful 2019 piece which will stay in history, I couldn't believe that Cats was actually competing. It was so bad. I mean, so bad that the CGI wasn't even completed. Judi Dench's character wasn't even fully CGI'd. Her whole hand, complete of ring, was just left out as a total human hand. But anyway, it didn't make it to the actual nominees, luckily. But the final nominees are Avengers Endgame, The Irishman, The Lion King, 1917, and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Now, Star Wars actually has some pretty impressive effects, but they weren't what made the film stand out. The film didn't stand out because of the effects. Think of other past winners or nominees, even Interstellar, The Matrix, or even current other nominees like The Lion King. That is a film in which the visual effects really stand out. Now, The Lion King actually went overboard. It's actually been heavily criticized for being basically nothing more than digital effects. It's basically just a remake of the 1994 film with wonderful effects. There's nothing more. So it could ironically win the category for being a film which is nothing more than its own effects. Again, I haven't seen 1917. The Irishman de-aged all of its characters in order to set them in various phases in time. Now, the first time I watched The Irishman, I appreciated the effects. I didn't mind them. But then a few of you pointed this out, and upon rewatching it, I noticed this. And what I mean is that you have these 70-plus-year-old bodies, take for example Robert De Niro, stiffly walking around on stilts to make them look taller on their 70-plus-year-old bodies, with a 30 or 40-year younger face slapped on them. So again, yes, The Lion King could win by being nothing more than its category. Then we have all the musical categories. I'm kind of in a blind zone regarding the original songs because there's one from Harriet, which I haven't seen, another one from Frozen 2, which again I haven't seen. So I'm going to focus on just the general scores, in which we have Joker with Hildur Gunnadóttir, Little Women by Alexandra Desplat, Marriage Story, Randy Newman, 1917, Thomas Newman, and I think the two Newmans are actually cousins, and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker by John Williams. I didn't even expect Star Wars to be here because although I loved the soundtrack right from the first trailers, I found it epic. Even if you didn't like The Rise of Skywalker, a lot of people didn't enjoy it. The soundtrack is an epic conclusion to the story. And I know I'm going to sound very ignorant and naive saying this, but I felt it wasn't that much more, it wasn't innovative. It was basically just a new take on the classic Star Wars theme. So yeah, I can't speak for 1917. Unfortunately, I don't even have an idea what the soundtrack sounds like. I'm so sorry. I think this could be Joker. I mean, Hildur Gunnadóttir has done two great soundtracks this year, both Joker and the Chernobyl series soundtrack. They are both similar, they're very anguishing, they perfectly describe the sadness of the environment. So yes, possible winner. Then I think the last category left is editing, and the nominees are Ford vs Ferrari, The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker and Parasite. Now, remember earlier when I said that Jojo Rabbit made me laugh out loud, then cry my eyes out because it's so sad, but also so funny, but also so gripping, all in a beautiful way? That is also down to the editing. This film moves smoothly from some of the most joyful moments to some of the most gut-wrenching ones, and you hardly notice a thing. But another big contender here is Parasite. Again, the editing is so smooth, it makes you feel as if the film is just 30 minutes long, but it makes the whole story progressively more and more anxiety-inducing. It goes from normal family routine scenes to people running, hiding, shouting, searching, doing things I'm not going to say to not spoil the plot. As a matter of fact, my prediction is that as in many other categories, Parasite could also be the winner here. And I think I managed to cover all the categories and all the films. I hope I didn't skip anything. And if you're still watching, thank you so much for sticking around. I make sure to leave a comment down below with your opinion on all these topics, on all these films, whether you agree, what your expectations are, who you'd like to see win in about a month's time. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye.